Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelly McManus. I lead Community Relations and Events at the University of Waterloo. And welcome to the third in our series of 6 weekly Ask Our Experts COVID-19 Community Talks. A special welcome back to those of you who are returning, and a welcome as well to any of our alumni who may be watching. The University of Waterloo is proud to be part of this community and to host these community talks that allow us to stay connected during the pandemic. And during uncertain times in particular, access to the facts is especially important. So we're delighted to bring our researchers right into your homes to share their expertise and answer your questions. We acknowledge that we work and live on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabeg, and Haudenosaunee peoples. The University of Waterloo is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River. Before I turn things over to today's moderator, I'll share a quick reminder about some housekeeping items for today. To change the layout of your video chat, simply hover over the gray button in the top right-hand corner of the video screen. If you have any questions for our speaker, please direct them to all panelists using the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. If you're having any technical difficulties, feel free to message the host directly via chat. A reminder that this event will be recorded and uploaded on the university's YouTube channel after the event, and you can visit our past talks there as well. It's now my pleasure to introduce Sheila Ager, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Waterloo. Welcome back, Dean Ager.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm very happy to be back here and taking part in this third event in the Ask Our Experts series. So I'm happy to be here again to moderate this conversation, and I am looking forward to these continued discussions with my colleagues and the wider community. I want to thank all of you for attending today's event. I'll be introducing our guest in a moment, but first I just wanted to give you a reminder about how these talks proceed. Our guests will speak for a few minutes about the topic at hand, and then they and I will have a further in-depth conversation on the subject. After that, we open it up for questions from the audience. So as Kelly said, in order to ask a question, please remember to use the Q&A panel, not the chat panel, on the right-hand side of your WebEx window, and please direct your questions to all participants. And then one little reminder from me as well, if things freeze up, please be patient. It's probably me, not you. So today's guest is Dr. Shanna MacDonald. Dr. MacDonald is an associate professor and associate chair in the Department of Communication Arts. Her SSHRC-funded interdisciplinary scholarship is situated between film, media, and performance studies. It examines intersectional feminism within social and digital media, popular culture, cinema, performance, and public art. Dr. MacDonald is also a convener of the Q Collaborative, the Q Lab, a feminist design lab dedicated to developing new forms of relationality through technologies of public performance. She is published in Feminist Media Histories, Media Theory Journal, Journal of the Fantastic in the Arts, and the Canadian Journal of Film Studies. Dr. MacDonald is with us today to discuss social media and life in quarantine in the time of COVID-19. So welcome, Shanna.
Hello, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you to the university for inviting me to speak today. I'm really thrilled to be here to share my thoughts with everybody live. I want to start by thinking a little bit about the broad issues of what it means to be using social media in the time of quarantine. Now that we're more than 2 months into pandemic life, it's good to take stock of the kinds of practices that we're engaging in and what that means for the future. So I think as a society and as individuals, we are assessing our lives pre-COVID and deciding what worked and what didn't, and what will be necessary for us as we adjust to our new normal. One of those areas that we're assessing is social media. Pre-COVID, we relied on social media for entertainment, news, pop culture, and so on. During COVID, that has increased. We are now using it digitally more than ever for work, socializing, getting our information, and even daily tasks like getting groceries. So I want to draw your attention to three kind of interesting things that are emerging in media scholarship around this. One is that COVID-19 is being described as the first global pandemic in the digital era. So again, physical distancing means that we're relying on social media platforms for all of our social functionings, all of our work and learning lives, but also governments and health organizations are relying on social media to communicate information to the public. So the upside of this means that we have quickly found ways to continue working and learning and carrying on our lives and gathering information to a reasonable extent. On the downside, or a growing concern, is what's being called an infodemic or an information pandemic, where information is circulating, some of it false, at rapid rates. And what this means, it's leaving a lot of the public confused. Some of it is making us feel uncertain, exhausted, and overwhelmed. And the most negative experiences are an increase in anxiety, a strain on our mental health, dangerous misinformation being put out about cures and whether or not the virus is real, and the spreading of xenophobia and racism. So these are real challenges we have in society that are based directly to social media. So we really need to examine the role that social media is playing and how we comprehend and process the impact of this global health crisis. And we want to make sure that social media is working for us to ensure that it's going to benefit all citizens equally rather than only a few. A second really interesting thing that the pandemic has highlighted for me is the importance of journalism in old media formats. And so this seems really counterintuitive for a social media scholar to be saying, but when I early on tried to get information about the virus in March, I felt that Twitter was really falling short from what I was expecting it to do for me. And I started to ask why. And one of the things that I decided was that Twitter is very fragmented in the way that it's structured. And it's too fragmented to give us the kinds of coherent narratives and clear information that we truly desire right now. It's offering short sound bites of people's opinions rather than consistent, verifiable information. So what ended up happening was that for the first time in a decade, I started watching the nightly news. And what I noticed there is that it's a very different format. It's predictable. It's got a very clear structure telling us both facts and human interest narratives. And it's doing this from a place of fact checking. So what this suggests for me is that the pandemic is revealing the limits of social media technologies. And this could lead us, hopefully, to integrating a more robust set of communication practices in our daily lives, where we're not just favoring the new, the constant new of apps over the old, but using all of them for what they do best for us. The last idea that I've been working through right now is that I'm seeing a really positive move within social media away from what I would say in pre-COVID times was a frenzy of self-promotion and self-branding. And we're moving towards more of a sense of fostering communities and using social media to let that happen. So we've quickly adapted to ensuring that we remain social through Google Hangouts, Zoom, and lots of other options. People are sharing their struggles online because a lot of people are isolated by themselves at home and they need a place to talk. And others are rushing in with kind words of support, offers of financial support, and crowdsourcing of funding, offering an ear to listen, offering memes and gifts to laugh, and offering different kinds of resources. And I think this is really important in this moment where people are feeling very lonely. Some families are grieving the loss of loved ones, and sometimes they're doing it in isolation, and people are under all kinds of strain. And so we're seeing the best of the internet coming out, I think, right now. Tied to that is we're seeing a lot less vitriol. And we're seeing a lot of people pushing back against that vitriol. And I think that's a really positive turn in what has been a kind of difficult, maybe 5 years of the internet as we know it. The last thing that I want to say about that is that I'm seeing people dialoguing online about what they want the internet to be and how they can make it work. And I'm seeing tech companies responding to that. And so I'm hoping that this direct dialogue, which wasn't always there, is going to lead to some lasting changes with how we engage in social media. One of the things that we need to take away from this is that big tech companies want us to keep using their platforms. And that means that in some ways we get to determine what shape those platforms take. If we push platforms in new and innovative ways, tech companies will respond and they will make it easier for us. And so this means that we're at a time where online use has the potential to make a really positive global impact. So those are some of the broad things that I'm thinking about right now as I'm watching the pandemic unfold. But I want to talk a little more closely about the everyday aspects of social media and quarantine life with Dean Egger.
Thank you, Shanna. It's fascinating observations. I mean, I would have to describe myself as someone who probably is not that great a user of social media, but a lot of what you've had to say just now really resonates with me too. So it hit even me. So I just had a few questions I thought that might get us going a little further on our conversation. So I'd like to start with a kind of a general question about the pandemic and being in this pandemic over the last, well, over 2 months now. And what do you feel that's taught us about the role of social media in our everyday lives?
Hmm. Well, I think again, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly of this. I think that we rely on social media a lot, and in a lot of different ways. And I do think that these are generational and tied to the cultural groups that we exist in. I think that we're using it for so many different reasons right now. We're using it for social connection. We're using it for personal expression. We're gathering information. We're checking in on others. We're filling our time, and we're getting inspiration. So we see trends happening right now of the sourdough bread or the growing your own onions. And so it's this kind of way in which we're sharing with each other coping mechanisms and then taking those up for ourselves and creating dialogues about that. That's the good. I think some of the things that we're learning that are less good, excuse me, are that we can get very fatigued from social media very easily. So, excuse me, some of us might be noticing that our Zoom social calendars are getting really full in ways that we weren't expecting. And this can be draining, especially after a day of being in online work meetings. And you know, there is a barrier. A screen is a barrier to certain types of intimacy that we're used to in our personal everyday lives. And so we're also adjusting, I think, on a cognitive and emotional level to what that means as well. So we're learning a lot about the limits of screens for ourselves and what we can take in a day. I think that we also are seeing that we have a need for balance. So what can we get out of social media and what can we skip over? I think is a question that we're beginning to ask ourselves. What do we want to prioritize in our use of screens every day? And when we tap out, what can we leave behind? So it's a bit of a reckoning that I think is actually very healthy for us. I think we're going to become very selective about the types of things we do online. And when we get tired out, we're going to turn to other things: baking, growing vegetables, reenacting famous paintings, or things that I've been seeing on the internet. What I'm interested in seeing is how those things that we're doing offline make their ways back online and how social media and technologies respond to that.
Thank you, Shanna. What you say there again resonates with me sort of personally because I've had a lot of Zoom meetings and a lot of Teams meetings over the last several weeks. And one observation I have had, and I don't know whether I share this with others, but I find myself more tired at the end of a day of virtual meetings through screens than I do when I'm in a live meeting. Is that something that you've heard observations on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people are trying to explain and figure out what that is. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, again, that barrier means that we can't pick up on those everyday body cues and gestures that we're so attuned to in a personal space. And so we're doing like double duty of trying to like glean that information, even though we're like, separated by a very different kind of distance. And so I think that the virtual can become very draining, and we're holding ourselves differently, to fit into the screen. There's a lot that goes on there. When things become pixelated, when voices don't, come across as clearly, when there's noise in the background of someone else's space, these are so exhausting. And I'm even seeing it in my kids when they're in their online classes where they just can't, they just tune out, and it's a big challenge.
Hmm. Okay, what you say makes a lot of sense there. So, excuse me. It's sort of a double-barreled question for you here, but maybe I'll just give you the overarching one first, and then we can dig down a little deeper. What concerns have been raised about social media and what one might call the excess use of screens at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think this comes up really often with parents who are monitoring their children's screen use. We've had at least a decade of studies telling us that we must limit the screen times that our children have. The recommendations are pretty tight. For children 2 to 5, it's 1 hour a day. For children 18 months and under, it's no screen times beyond family video chats. And so this is a pressure that we've been negotiating for a long time as parents, I think, because the concern with screens is, I mean, there's many, many studies about that, but even on an anecdotal level, you know, binge watching TV, if you're 4, can really make you look like a zombie after a couple of hours. Like it's it's not good. And I think we all feel that, whether we're 4 or if we're 40. So yeah, so there's a lot of concerns right now because all of our time is on screens, and this is not just us, this is our children as well. And so I've been thinking a lot about this as a parent, and I've been doing a lot of reading on this. And I think that the recommendations don't work anymore. We need new guidelines. We need to make new decisions, and we don't know what it's going to look like, how long this is going to go on, but we have to reassess. And so what recommendations are happening now is thinking about the quality of the content that our children are consuming. So it's less about time and it's more about quality and context. And so I think that it's really important that we're assessing what are they consuming, what are the purposes for that, and having really upfront conversations with them at an age-appropriate level about the kinds of dangers that they're faced with. So one of the main concerns with screen time, especially when parents are working and can't monitor as closely as they would like what children are consuming, is child predators online are taking advantage of this moment. And the UN has put out a study about this and a warning. And so it's really important that we talk about online stranger danger with our children. It's really important that we ensure that they're not giving any personal information away. As parents, it's great if we can monitor who they're interacting with and what their social accounts. So all of my children's social accounts are tied to me. I have to approve everything and I can monitor everything. But my kids are young, they're 4 and 8. So this is a reasonable kind of place to be with them. But it's really important that we're ensuring what comes at them and if they're protected from outside spaces that are going to be less safe. I have a friend who's really inspired me. She's her preteen has taken up a really great YouTube channel, is doing amazing and hilarious work. I mean, it's great because she's learning technology, she's learning editing skills, a lot of really great things that will serve her in the future. But my friend has gets to approve the subscribers and has cut off the comments. And that's a way of keeping her daughter safe, but also ensuring that she can engage with technology in an appropriate way. So I think context is really important. Boundaries are really important. I think that ensuring that children understand the importance of balancing online time with offline time, having a list of activities that they can switch out to. And you know, you know your children best, and you know your family context the best. And so if you have a child who can easily switch from 3 hours of binging television and then pop over to their Lego or go outside, great. I think that you have some leeway. If you have a kid like my 4-year-old who has a tantrum every time I take a screen away, you have to be a little bit more specific with your boundaries, and just explaining to them what the effects of these things are, that their video games want them to keep playing, that the stickers they're using on their social media with their friends want them to keep adding stickers and clicking, and you know, and let them understand the technologies for themselves as well. They're smart, they can figure it out.
I think, you know, for teenagers, I feel as though this period has been particularly difficult, because, you know, they're wanting in a way to break away from family for their social life and to engage more with their friends. And now, of course, they're forced to do it through screen time. And I just wonder whether you have any special suggestions for how we counteract the challenges of too much screen time and the kind of independence that teenagers want to have.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I mean, hopefully they have established or are aware of, and if they're not, this is a great place for conversation, um, setting their own boundaries. If they want independence and they want to have responsibility, they must understand digital responsibility as well. And so having those frank conversations with your teenagers is important. There is tons of age-appropriate, thought-provoking content on the internet that you can go to. So if you go to YouTube and you say setting screen limits or, you know, social media boundaries, teens, you will get really great kind of thought pieces that you can use to spark a conversation with your family. So I think the same of setting boundaries, expectations, and the whys. Why am I asking this of you as a teenager? Why am I asking you to have this responsibility are really important, because they're digital citizens and they always will be. And this is the kind of literacy they need to take into as they grow up as adults. Now, having said that, I actually have a ton of faith in Generation Z and teenagers of Generation Z. They are incredibly thoughtful. They have come of age in a very difficult time. They're deeply aware of all the troubles facing them, and they use the internet a bit differently. And I think they know how to create boundaries. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. Um, I've heard a lot of people saying, I'm actually craving in-person time. This is really, really hard. And so I almost think it's going to be a great learning experience that the minute they actually get to see people in public again, they may savor that in a different way. So I'm looking at it as a learning opportunity. I think that the only thing you can do is have conversations with them and then offer alternatives. Movie nights, like I am not limiting family movie nights, family Nintendo Switch games, family Zoom chats. That to me isn't screen. So if you can get them away from clicking endlessly on Instagram and do something else, even if it's digitally oriented, but it's engaging the family, even if they want to get away from you, just let them pick the movie. I don't know. I don't have teenagers yet. But I actually
look forward to.
yeah. I do think TikTok is good in this instance. It's not a particularly evil app at the moment, and it's fun, and it's a way that I think they could engage with their family. So I wouldn't be afraid of TikTok. If I was a parent, I would be trying to engage with them and their TikTok.
Okay, thank you. We're just about ready to move to questions from the audience. I might just ask you if you could briefly address one more thing that I'm interested in, and that is, how does social media shape the information we receive about COVID-19?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and one that I think we need to be very cautious and careful with. Um, the thing about social media is that easily digestible sound bites can be rapidly turned into viral information. And there's no mechanism in place to slow that down, even if it is incorrect information. And so the internet is like a large public discussion. And we get to dip in at different points in that discussion. And we're constricted by the algorithms that show us only what an app thinks we want to see, which is what we call echo chambers, where we're stuck in a space, we only see people's views that reflect our own. And so social media is shaping the way that the virus and how we make sense of it in our everyday lives. And I think we can talk about this to the good and to the bad. The good means that we're seeing a lot of generosity and we're seeing people really come together and show the best of themselves in helping ways. We're seeing a lot of that. And we're seeing a lot of fun on the internet, which is helping us with our boredom and our but it's also spreading a ton of misinformation, which social media is really good at also because it plays on our emotions. We tend to click on things and spend time on things that either activate humor or anger or fear. And so it's not fact-based. It's not that dry information that we don't really want to wade through on a government website, which is giving us, it's doing something different. It's activating emotions for us. And so that's why it becomes viral. And I think these are the things that we have to stop and really consider. Why am I clicking on this? What is it activating in me? To what end? And ask ourselves to be critical consumers of the social media that we're confronted with.
Okay, very good advice. Thank you. So I think we're going to move on to question period with our audience. We already have some questions that people sent in prior to the event, and I'm looking forward to the questions that our audience can now send in via the WebEx Q&A panel. I hope Shanna's presentation has already helped to answer a lot of your questions, and I apologize ahead of time if we're unable to get to your questions. So I'm just going to begin with some of the questions that were sent in ahead of time. And maybe this dovetails with what you've just said, and that's the concern around conspiracy theories and the susceptibility that people have to conspiracy theories, especially in such a circumstance and via social media.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really important question because we The troubling thing is that when we spread this kind of information and conspiracy theories, it's impacting people's health and their daily lives and the choices they make. So this is real. This is not just like, oh, let's just ignore that. It's like, no, it's impacting people's lives, and information accuracy is key. And so I think that there's two ways to approach this. One is that a large part of combating this misinformation lies with tech giants. Tech companies must take responsibility for ensuring that they're not allowing for the spread of misinformation. And a lot of them are beginning to really take this seriously. So last month, Google put $6.5 million towards fact-checking organizations and nonprofits. The World Health Organization is working closely with Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok to be the ones verifying and responding to whatever is circulating within those platforms. And so it's really easy on TikTok. If you just go on the hashtag coronavirus, there's a Mythbusters section, and every single question is answered by the World Health Organization in a really user-friendly and visually appealing way. So it's gonna work for a lot of audiences. So I really feel like part of this lies with the companies themselves who are providing us our social media platforms. Beyond that, we as media consumers have to negotiate what we see in our feeds. So there's two ways that we get to do this. One, we get to be critical consumers of media. We get to ask the basic questions that I teach all my comm studies students in first year. Who speaks? What are they saying? And to what end? So first, consider your source. Is it verified? Is it a long-standing media outlet with a rigorous journalistic set of standards for fact-checking? Is it coming from a World Health or public health organizations or the government? Is it coming from someone who's trained and respected in their field? So who's speaking? That's really important. And if it is in one of those categories, then take it seriously. This is why I think traditional news outlets and media briefs from governments are so important right now, because they take a lot of time to be very careful in what they're putting forward. They're not going to say something that isn't accurate. And so the information might feel like it's lagging and you're frustrated because it's not coming out the way you want it to, but that's because they're really checking through and making sure that what they're saying is not going to be catastrophic for the population. I think also you have to start to ask, is the message being delivered in a factual, direct, and calm manner? Or is it clickbait? If it's clickbait, if it's appealing to your emotions, if it's sparking fear or anger, if it's sensationalizing anything, you must take a pause with that and think about it for a second. Beyond that, you get to ask why. This is the deeper question we need to be asking. Why coronavirus? What are they called? The pandemic or the conspiracy theories? Why? Why now? What purpose is it serving? Is it promoting certain belief systems and using that as a way, as a vehicle? Is it distracting people from hard realities that we're having a hard time managing? And so this is a way to kind of jump out into something else. So I think we need to ask the whys. You can run any fact that you see. I'm going to put fact, anything, any information you see, you can run through Google Fact Check, which is a tool that gives you access to Full Fact from the UK, factcheck.org, and PolitiFact from the US. These are verifiable fact-checking organizations. You can also share fact-checking resources through the hashtag Coronavirus Facts Alliance, which is run by the International Fact-Checking Network. And so these are places where you can run things through. If you are seeing a lot of information coming up on your friends' feeds, you can either say nothing and just not engage. If you feel comfortable, you can gently suggest, here are some fact-checking places that you can run your ideas through. And I think for your part, you need to be sharing as much established information as possible to ensure that accurate information is circulating as virally as misinformation. That would be my advice.
Thank you. Now I see a number of questions are appearing in the Q&A section, so I'd like to move to them for the moment. Here is an interesting one. One of our audience members says, I would love to hear your opinion on this thought. Often it's said that extroverts recharge by speaking with others. Do you think that this computer-mediated interactions are a suitable replacement?
What does reach hard mean in that context? That's really interesting. I mean, the thing that it sparks in my mind right now is that I am an extrovert and I'm reaching hard through my screen. I feel like my gestures are huge. I'm like really leaning in. I mean, I think I do that in public around people as well. But I wonder if that's one of the reasons why it can be exhausting to be on screen, is because you're emphatically trying to feel that connection with someone. And if you are an extrovert, you're doing a lot of this. I'm not sure how else to answer that in terms of what reach hard means. I wonder if extroverts are posting more frequently, are getting out there, if that's another way in which we're reaching hard. I'm seeing a lot of comments and memes and jokes around how like introverts are living their best life right now because this is how they've always lived. So I mean, I think it's a really worthwhile thing to take up. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Do you think that there are certain platforms that are better suited for the current situation?
Yeah, I
I'm
think
asking you to give an advertising sponsorship or anything here, but
I'm really comfortable doing that. But no, I think that's a great question. This cuts to the point that every platform is good for different things. And they do things very differently. So, you know, Twitter in its inception was sort of a way of documenting and journaling your everyday life and sharing that with others. It got taken up in very different ways, and in ways that I think are also really great, because it's a great place to create social movements via a hashtag. But it's not a great place, I think, for clear and coherent information right now. I think Facebook was kind of on the wane prior to COVID. Any of my students under 25 did not have a Facebook account. It was not a thing. You know, so Facebook is good, I think, for the kinds of reconnections we're looking for right now, because we aren't seeing people in places. It's a very social space. And I think that Instagram in some ways is suffering the most, because it's really, really hard to do self-promotion right now. It's really, really hard to show that you are living your best life in these really beautiful, well-curated ways, because you can't leave your house. And so I think that we're seeing clearly coming about what are the best things about these media and what are their limits. So again, that brings me back to the fact that I find traditional journalism to be really great right now. Places where you can do more elaborate thought pieces, where you can really unpack and analyze things. People have time to do the long read right now. And so I think that's key. TikTok is apparently winning the social media popularity contest right now. And I think that's because what it does best is challenges your creativity in times of boredom. TikTok is about showing kind of funny takes on life at home. I mean, the bathroom is the space of TikTok videos, but also stunts when you're bored. And these are two things that we have an abundance of right now: time at home and boredom. And so I do think that TikTok is the thing that's really going to rise within this. And I think that keep an eye on it, because it's going to shape our social practices in the way that 2 years ago, Instagram ensured that we all went and took pictures in sunflower fields or apple orchards, right? It changed how we were working as a you know, a set of people expressing themselves online. TikTok will create some new trends, I think, in our online practices and everyday lives.
I think that's really interesting. And you know what you say about boredom is something that we're going to be exploring later on in this series, actually. So we'll certainly be coming back to that particular topic. Of course, now I feel my age extremely, since Facebook is pretty much my limit. But whatever. This may be related actually to what you've just said, so it might be a little bit further on this. Do you think that different kinds of social media tend towards different social and ethical relations? So, for instance, would that mean that print might give you one type of a social or political view and Twitter give you another?
Yeah, that's excellent. Yes, absolutely. And I think that that's the work that we as a public want to do, and those are the kind of conversations we want to be having. So, I mean, there are limits obviously to print. I've been kind of valorizing old media, but there's a reason why new media and social media exist. They exist because they allow for participatory culture. They allow us to participate with no gateway or barrier. So, print media and television journalism require expertise, they require training. You are in a job. There is a huge mechanism there that decides what news gets told and what gets selected, right? And so there are tons of things we want to be critical about with that. So what social media lets us do then is to be part of the conversation in real time and to reach huge audiences. And that's really important. And so I think going back then, what kind of ethics or what kind of relationships are fostered by different media or different social media is really important. Because I mean, pre-COVID, there was a kind of way in which we would talk about Twitter as a trash fire, as a really bad place to go, and a place that was really bad for your mental health because it was incredibly negative. There was a lot of negativity and a lot of fighting, a lot of Twitter fighting happening. And this would depend on who you were following and how that got assembled within your timeline. A lot of people talk about Instagram as their happy place, because it's a little bit more soothing and what kind of content it's bringing forward to you. I don't think those actually hold, because everybody's experience of social media is different, but I do think they create different types of ethical situations. I don't often see people fighting to the same extent or in a way that's very public on Instagram in the same way that you do on Twitter. And so there's different ethical relations being suggested there. I mean, the great thing about Facebook in some ways, and there's a lot we could say critically about Facebook, but one of the great things is that it allows for long form. You can write a novel and share it with your community. Facebook has closed groups that are safer spaces for gathering, where you're not going to be attacked in the way that you are on Twitter, because Twitter is incredibly public. So different ethics, I think, come out in those different spaces, but those are not hard and fast rules. And so the only way that you can kind of come up with that on your own is to think about, well, what do I use these different platforms for? Am I doing something a little bit differently here than there? What works for me here? What doesn't work for me there? And again, if things aren't working for you on a platform, either leave the platform or try and push against it in a way that doesn't exhaust you, or bring different content into that platform that allows it to kind of shift in a different way.
Thank you. I don't myself use Twitter, but it strikes me that it is constructed to allow sort of immediate and off the cuff responses to things.
And
Yeah.
it prioritizes those, what we call hot takes, right? Where they're not thoughtful or sometimes it's great. I mean, it's a really great medium for some things, but it is so rapid. It is so quick. People often regret the hot takes they put on, because then they get kind of like piled on with a lot of criticism. It's a really strong place for that kind of very tumultuous kind of discourse.
Yeah. Thank you, Shanna. I'm afraid we're going to have to start wrapping up now, actually. It's been wonderful to see so much interest in the topic. And I want to thank Shanna sincerely for her insightful presentation. And I also want to thank our audience for their enthusiastic participation. This has been wonderful. This has really been fun. So just a couple of things before we go then. We have a slide coming up that shows you that we've provided some additional resources for you to learn more about how to fact check your news, a guide for parents, and also how to engage with friends and family through board games online. Sounds good, because mostly what I do with my family is that we brag by showing each other the puzzles we've done. Maybe we should graduate to actually playing games together. All of these resources are going to be posted in our chat as well. And I also want to point out that a recording of today's talk will be posted on YouTube shortly. And then one last item just before we go, and that is to remind you about next week's community conversation, which will take place on Wednesday, May 27th. Our guest will be Professor James Thompson from the School of Accounting and Finance, and he'll be speaking with us about planning for retirement in uncertain financial times. And you can find more information at uwaterloo.ca/community. So thanks again to our guest, Shanna McDonald. And thanks also to all of you for attending today's Ask Our Expert talk. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you next week.